Control is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. Most people think control means dominance, force, authority over others, or the ability to bend situations to their will. That belief alone is why so many people feel powerless when things do not go their way. Real control is quieter, it is internal, it is psychological, and it determines who stays composed under pressure and who collapses when circumstances shift. You have seen it before. Two people face the same stress, the same conflict, the same uncertainty. One panics, overreacts, explains too much, rushes decisions, and loses leverage. The other stays calm, measured, and deliberate. Nothing about the situation gives them that advantage. Their mind does. This book is about that difference. The psychology of control is not about suppressing emotion or pretending not to feel. It is about understanding emotion without being ruled by it. It is about seeing clearly when others are overwhelmed by noise. It is about maintaining inner stability so no situation can hijack your behavior. Most people give away control without realizing it. They react instead of respond. They attach instead of observe. They rush instead of wait. They speak when silence would serve them better. They seek validation when detachment would give them leverage. Over time, these small losses compound. Power drains quietly, moment by moment, choice by choice. The people who remain powerful are not lucky, they are disciplined. They have trained themselves to stay centered while others are pulled off balance. They do not try to control the world, they control their response to it. That is the foundation of real power. This book will teach you how to build that foundation, not through tricks or manipulation, but through awareness, restraint, and strategic thinking. You will learn how control works internally, how it shapes perception, communication, timing, and influence, and how it becomes an identity rather than an effort. By the end, you will understand why some people remain unshaken in any situation, and how to become one of them. Control is not about force, it is about composure. And composure changes everything.
Chapter 1. Why most people lose control internally first. Control is rarely lost in the moment something happens. It is lost long before that, inside the mind. Most people believe situations overpower them. In reality, their internal reactions do. The loss of control begins the instant emotion takes the lead without awareness. A comment feels disrespectful, anxiety rises, the body tightens, and the mind rushes to defend, explain, or escape. From that point on, the situation is no longer being handled, it is handling them. This is how power leaks away quietly. Emotional reactions feel automatic, but they are not inevitable. They are conditioned patterns built over years. Triggers form when past experiences teach the nervous system that certain situations mean danger, rejection, loss, or humiliation. When a similar signal appears, the body reacts before the mind can think. The heart rate increases, breathing shortens, and clarity collapses. Control disappears not because the situation is extreme, but because the response is unconscious. Most people live in this state. They are mentally outsourced to their environment. A bad message ruins their day. A delay makes them irritated. A disagreement pulls them into defensiveness. Their mood, confidence, and behavior shift based on what is happening around them. This is not strength, it is dependence, and dependence makes a person predictable, reactive, and easy to destabilize. The first layer of control is recognizing this internal takeover, not judging it, not fighting it, simply seeing it. The moment you can notice an emotional surge without immediately obeying it, you create space. That space is power. Without it, even intelligent people make weak decisions. They say things they regret. They agree to things they do not want. They rush to relieve discomfort instead of protecting long-term positioning. This is why control must start internally. External dominance means nothing if your emotions can be hijacked. A person who cannot regulate their internal state will always be vulnerable, no matter how confident they appear on the surface. Losing control internally also distorts perception. When emotions run high, reality narrows. You see threats where none exist. You assume intent without evidence. You exaggerate consequences and minimize options. The mind shifts from strategic thinking to survival mode. In that state, winning is impossible. The goal becomes relief, not advantage. Power begins when you stop outsourcing your behavior to feelings, when you recognize that emotions are signals, not commands, when you understand that the first battle is always inside. Master that, and external situations lose their ability to shake you.
Once you understand that control is lost internally first, the next question becomes simple but uncomfortable. How do you take it back? The answer is not suppression. It is not forcing yourself to feel calm or pretending emotions are not there. That approach only pushes tension deeper, where it leaks out later through impulsive decisions, passive aggression, or burnout. Real authority is restored through awareness and choice. The mental shift that changes everything is learning to observe your internal state instead of merging with it. Most people experience emotions as commands. Anger says react, fear says escape, anxiety says hurry. But emotions are not instructions, they are information. When you create distance between the feeling and the action, you regain control. That distance can be small, a single breath, a pause before speaking, a moment of silence before responding. But inside that pause, something powerful happens. You interrupt the automatic pattern. You move from reaction to response. This is where authority returns. The mind shifts from being inside the emotion to standing above it. Instead of I am angry, it becomes I notice anger. Instead of I am anxious, it becomes I feel anxiety rising. That linguistic shift is not semantic, it is structural. It separates identity from sensation. And once you are no longer identified with the emotion, you are free to choose how to act. This is the foundation of composure. Composure is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of control despite emotion. People often mistake calmness for weakness because they associate power with intensity. In reality, intensity without control is volatility, and volatility makes you predictable. The person who stays measured while others escalate immediately gains leverage. Their words carry more weight. Their silence creates pressure. Their decisions shape the direction of the situation. Authority does not come from force, it comes from steadiness. This mental shift also changes how others respond to you. When you do not rush, people fill the space. When you do not defend, accusations lose power. When you do not react, provocation fails. Control becomes visible not through what you do, but through what you refuse to do. Over time, this becomes an identity. You are no longer someone who struggles to stay composed. You are someone who expects composure from yourself. That expectation rewires behavior. Situations stop feeling overwhelming because you trust your ability to handle them. The world does not need to be controlled. Your response does. And once you master that, authority follows naturally.
Chapter 2. Why emotional attachment makes you predictable. Control weakens the moment you become emotionally attached to an outcome. Attachment feels harmless at first. You care. You want something to work. You invest energy, time, and identity into a result. But beneath that investment is a hidden cost. The more you need a specific outcome, the more power you hand over to circumstances and to other people. Need creates tension. Tension creates urgency. Urgency collapses judgment. When you are attached, your mind stops evaluating clearly and starts protecting emotionally. You interpret events through fear of loss or desire for validation. You read signals selectively. You hear what you want to hear. You ignore warning signs because acknowledging them would threaten what you are hoping for. This is how intelligent people make weak decisions while believing they are being rational. Emotional attachment also makes behavior easy to predict. When someone knows what you want badly, they know how to move you. They can delay you, pressure you, withhold approval, or dangle possibility. Even without malicious intent, dynamics shift. You start explaining more than necessary. You negotiate against yourself. You rush to close instead of letting leverage build. Control slips quietly, not through confrontation, but through eagerness. In relationships, attachment shows up as fear of abandonment or fear of conflict. You avoid saying what needs to be said. You tolerate behavior you should correct. You overinvest to secure reassurance. In work, attachment shows up as needing recognition, needing certainty, needing quick wins. You take deals that do not serve you long term. You commit before positioning yourself properly. In both cases, the pattern is the same. The more you need, the less power you have. This is not because caring is wrong. It is because clinging distorts perception. Attachment narrows your field of vision. You focus on the desired result instead of the entire situation. You miss alternatives. You miss timing. You miss leverage. Strategic thinkers understand this instinctively. They care about outcomes, but they are not emotionally fused to them. They are willing to walk away. They are willing to wait. They are willing to let situations unfold without forcing resolution. That willingness creates freedom. Freedom restores control. Predictability disappears when attachment loosens. You become harder to pressure because your decisions are no longer driven by relief or approval. You respond based on alignment, not anxiety. This is the paradox of control. The less you emotionally grasp, the more authority you gain. When outcomes stop owning you, you regain the ability to choose cleanly. And clean choice is where real power lives.
Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, coldness, or lack of care. In reality, detachment is clarity. It is the ability to stay mentally free while still being fully engaged. When you are detached, you are not numbing yourself or withdrawing effort. You are removing emotional urgency from the decision-making process. That single shift changes how you see, how you choose, and how you move. Detachment allows you to observe situations as they are, not as you fear they might become or hope they will turn into. Without emotional pressure distorting your thinking, patterns become visible. Motives become clearer. Timing becomes easier to sense. You stop forcing outcomes and start positioning for them. This is why detachment sharpens judgment. It restores perspective. When you are not desperate for resolution, you can afford to wait. When you are not afraid of loss, you can afford to say no. When you are not chasing validation, you can afford to be honest. That freedom creates leverage. People feel it immediately, even if they cannot explain it. Conversations slow down. Power dynamics shift. The person who is least emotionally invested controls the pace. Detachment also protects you from self-betrayal. Many people know what the right decision is, but they override it to avoid discomfort. They stay silent to avoid tension. They agree to things they resent. They act against their long-term interests for short-term relief. Detachment interrupts that pattern. It gives you enough internal space to tolerate discomfort without surrendering control. You stop negotiating against yourself. You stop explaining what does not need explanation. You stop reacting to pressure as if it were an emergency. Instead, you respond from alignment. This does not make you passive, it makes you precise. Detached people are not slow, they are selective. They move when the move makes sense, not when anxiety demands action. Over time, this becomes visible strength. Others begin to mirror your calm or reveal their instability. Both outcomes work in your favor. Detachment also deepens self-trust. When you know you can walk away, you stop clinging. When you stop clinging, you think more clearly. When you think more clearly, your decisions compound positively. This is how detachment becomes power. Not by disconnecting from life, but by staying internally sovereign no matter what life presents. Control is not about gripping harder, it is about loosening the grip just enough to see clearly. That clarity is what keeps you powerful in any situation.
Chapter 3. Why most people misread situations. Loss of control often begins with misinterpretation, not because people are unintelligent, but because perception is rarely neutral. Most people do not see situations as they are. They see them filtered through emotion, memory, expectation, and fear. A tone sounds hostile because the mind is already defensive. Silence feels threatening because uncertainty triggers anxiety. A neutral comment is taken personally because identity is involved. In these moments, the situation itself is not the problem, the interpretation is. Emotional coloring distorts reality. When the nervous system is activated, the brain prioritizes protection over accuracy. It scans for threats, not truth. This leads to exaggerated conclusions, assumed intent, and premature reactions. Someone disagrees and it becomes disrespect. Someone hesitates and it becomes rejection. A delay becomes a disaster. These distortions feel real in the moment, which is why they are so dangerous. They push people into unnecessary conflict, rushed decisions, and self-sabotage while convincing them they are justified. Another reason people misread situations is over-identification. When your self-worth is tied to outcomes, feedback feels like attack. When your identity is tied to being right, disagreement feels like loss. When your sense of safety depends on control, uncertainty feels intolerable. In these states, perception narrows. You stop asking what is happening and start asking what this means about you. That shift collapses objectivity. The situation itself becomes personal, and once that happens, control is already slipping. Assumptions also play a major role. The mind hates ambiguity, so it fills gaps quickly. It assigns motives without evidence. It predicts outcomes without data. It connects dots that are not there. These assumptions often go unchallenged because questioning them would require slowing down and tolerating uncertainty. Most people would rather be certain and wrong than uncertain and calm. Strategic control requires the opposite. It requires the willingness to admit you might not be seeing the full picture yet. Misreading situations also comes from confusing emotion with information. Feelings are treated as facts. If it feels wrong, it must be wrong. If it feels urgent, it must be urgent. If it feels threatening, it must be dangerous. This is how emotional states hijack judgment. The truth is, feelings indicate internal reactions, not external reality. Until you separate the two, perception remains compromised. Control cannot exist without accurate perception. You cannot stay powerful in a situation you do not understand clearly. And clarity begins by recognizing how often the mind lies when it feels threatened.
Clear perception under pressure is not a personality trait. It is a trained skill. The difference between those who stay powerful in tense situations and those who lose control is not emotional absence, but mental discipline. When pressure rises, most people collapse inward. Their attention narrows, their thoughts speed up, and their interpretation becomes distorted. Training yourself to see clearly means learning how to widen awareness precisely when the mind wants to shrink it. The first step is slowing the internal tempo, not the situation, the mind. Pressure creates the illusion that everything must be handled immediately. In reality, urgency is often psychological, not factual. When you slow your breathing, relax the body, and pause your speech, the nervous system settles. As the body calms, perception stabilizes. This is not relaxation for comfort, it is regulation for clarity. The second step is separating facts from stories. Facts are observable, words spoken, actions taken, timelines. Everything else is interpretation. When tension is high, the mind weaves narratives to fill uncertainty. He is disrespecting me. This is going to fail. They are trying to undermine me. None of these are facts. Training yourself to mentally label what you know versus what you assume immediately restores leverage. You stop reacting to imagined threats and start responding to real information. The third step is shifting perspective. Ask what else could be true. Ask how someone neutral would interpret this. Ask what you might be missing. These questions interrupt certainty and reopen curiosity. Curiosity is powerful because it keeps the mind flexible. Rigid minds break under pressure. Flexible minds adapt. Another critical element is emotional acknowledgement without obedience. Suppressing emotion clouds perception just as much as indulging it. Instead, name the feeling internally without acting on it. This creates distance. Distance restores choice. Over time, this practice builds confidence. You begin to trust that you can handle discomfort without losing clarity. Finally, train through repetition. Reflection after the fact sharpens perception for the future. Ask what you missed. Ask what you assumed. Ask where emotion colored judgment. This turns experience into skill. Seeing clearly under pressure is not about being calm all the time. It is about staying accurate. Accuracy leads to better decisions. Better decisions compound, and compounded decisions are what keep you powerful in any situation.
Chapter 4. Why talking too much gives away control. Silence is uncomfortable for most people. When tension appears, the instinct is to fill the space, to explain, to justify, to clarify intentions, to defend. This instinct feels protective, but it often does the opposite. Talking too much under pressure is one of the fastest ways to surrender control. Words reveal emotional position. They expose urgency, insecurity, and need. The more you speak, the more information you give away about where you stand internally. In moments of uncertainty, that information becomes leverage for others. Over-explaining is usually driven by anxiety. The mind wants relief. It wants to be understood immediately. It wants to resolve discomfort as fast as possible. So it rushes into language without fully thinking through impact or timing. In doing so, it weakens position. Each extra sentence narrows options. Each unnecessary detail invites interpretation. Each defensive explanation signals that something is at stake emotionally. Strategic control requires the opposite. It requires restraint. Silence slows the exchange. It creates space, and space shifts power. When you speak less, others reveal more. They fill the gap with assumptions, explanations, or concessions. Their tone changes. Their priorities surface. Silence forces the situation to breathe. It prevents premature escalation and gives you time to observe. This is not about being evasive or manipulative. It is about not leaking power through compulsive communication. People who talk excessively often believe they're being transparent or proactive. In reality, they are reacting. They are trying to manage perception instead of managing position. This is especially dangerous in conflict. When emotions are high, words are rarely received as intended. They are filtered through defensiveness and bias. The more you say, the more likely something will be misunderstood or used against you later. Silence, on the other hand, is neutral. It cannot be misquoted. It cannot be twisted. It communicates confidence without aggression. It says, "I am not threatened by this moment." That message alone can change the direction of an interaction. Silence also forces internal regulation. When you resist the urge to speak, you must sit with the feeling that wants expression. That strengthens self-control. Over time, you learn that not every thought needs to be externalized, and not every emotion needs a voice. Control grows in that restraint. People who remain powerful understand that timing matters more than volume. They choose words carefully and sparingly. They let silence do part of the work. In tense situations, silence is not absence, it is presence, and presence is power.
Silence is not just the absence of speech, it is an active position. When used deliberately, it becomes one of the most effective tools for regaining authority in any situation. Authority does not come from convincing others. It comes from composure that cannot be rushed, pressured, or shaken. Silence communicates that composure instantly. When you stop reacting verbally, you break the expected pattern. Most interactions follow predictable scripts. Someone provokes, challenges, questions, or pressures, and the other person responds immediately. When that response does not come, the dynamic shifts. The person who initiated now has to deal with uncertainty. They do not know what you're thinking. They do not know where they stand. That uncertainty creates psychological pressure. Pressure shifts power. Silence also allows you to reclaim internal control. Speaking too quickly often means thinking too slowly. When you pause, your nervous system settles. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts organize. You stop operating from impulse and start operating from intention. That pause protects you from saying things that cannot be taken back. It gives you the ability to choose words that serve your position rather than your emotion. Silence is especially powerful in conflict because it refuses escalation. When someone is emotionally charged, they often want a reaction to justify their intensity. If you meet them with calm silence, the energy has nowhere to go. It either softens or exposes itself. Both outcomes work in your favor. If it softens, the interaction de-escalates. If it escalates, you gain clarity about who is acting from emotion and who is acting from control. Silence also changes how others perceive you. People associate restraint with confidence. When you do not rush to explain or defend, it signals that you trust your position. That trust is contagious. Others begin to second-guess their assumptions. They listen more closely. They speak more carefully. Authority grows not through dominance, but through steadiness. Using silence does not mean withholding communication indefinitely. It means choosing the right moment to speak. When you do speak after a pause, your words carry more weight. They sound considered. They land more clearly. They shape the direction of the situation instead of reacting to it. Over time, silence becomes part of your presence. People sense that you are not easily pulled into noise. They approach you differently. Conversations slow down around you. That is power. Silence is not passivity. It is control in its most composed form. When you master silence, you stop chasing authority and start embodying it.
Chapter 5. How Triggers Control People. Most people believe they are in control until something triggers them. A certain tone, a familiar criticism, a look of disapproval, a feeling of being ignored or challenged. In that instant, behavior shifts. The body reacts before the mind can intervene. Words come out sharper than intended. Decisions become rushed. Composure disappears. This is how triggers control people, not through logic, but through conditioning. Triggers are emotional shortcuts formed by past experiences. At some point, the mind learned that a specific signal meant danger, loss, or threat to identity. Over time, that signal became automatic. The present moment no longer matters. The nervous system responds as if the past is happening again. This is why people often overreact to situations that do not objectively warrant it. They are not responding to what is in front of them. They are responding to what it reminds them of. When a trigger is activated, control is temporarily outsourced. The mind enters defense mode. Its priority shifts from understanding to protecting. In this state, strategic thinking collapses. The goal becomes relief, not resolution. People interrupt, they justify, they attack, they withdraw. Whatever reduces discomfort fastest feels right in the moment, even if it creates long-term damage. This is how triggers quietly sabotage power. They make behavior predictable. Anyone who can activate your trigger can influence your actions. They do not need authority or force. They only need access to your emotional buttons. This is why control requires trigger awareness. Until you understand what sets you off, you are not fully in charge of yourself. Triggers also distort perception. When activated, the mind exaggerates threat and minimizes options. Neutral events feel hostile. Delays feel intentional. Disagreement feels personal. This distortion reinforces the reaction and convinces the person they are justified. From the inside, it feels like clarity. From the outside, it looks like loss of control.
The most dangerous part is that triggers feel invisible. They operate beneath conscious awareness. People often say, "This is just how I am," or "Anyone would react this way." That belief protects the trigger from being examined, and what remains unexamined remains in control. Power begins when you stop identifying with your reactions and start studying them. When you notice patterns in what provokes you. When you recognize that intensity is a signal, not a command. Triggers do not disappear overnight, but once they are visible, they lose authority. Awareness weakens their grip, and weakening their grip is the first step toward reclaiming control in any situation.
Once you recognize how triggers control behavior, the next step is reclaiming authorship over your responses. Control is not about eliminating triggers. It is about changing what happens after they appear. Most people believe their reactions are fixed, but they are not. They are habits, and habits can be rewritten. The moment a trigger activates, there is a brief window before reaction takes over. That window is small, but it is enough. Inside it, you have a choice, not between feeling or not feeling, but between obeying the impulse or observing it. Observation weakens the automatic loop. Instead of reacting, you notice the surge, the tight chest, the urge to speak, the desire to defend or withdraw. By naming it internally, you interrupt the pattern. This creates space between stimulus and response. That space is where control lives. Rewriting responses requires slowing down the body before directing the mind. The nervous system leads behavior. When it is agitated, reasoning fails. Deepening the breath, relaxing the jaw, grounding the posture, all send signals of safety. As the body settles, clarity returns. From that state, you can choose a response aligned with your long-term interest instead of short-term relief. This is not passive, it is disciplined. Another critical shift is deciding your responses in advance. Strategic control is proactive, not reactive. Identify situations that trigger you repeatedly: criticism, delay, disrespect, uncertainty. Then decide ahead of time how you will respond. Silence, clarifying questions, a pause before engagement. Having a default response removes the need to improvise under pressure. It protects you from emotional hijacking. Language also matters. Replace internal statements like "I have to respond" with "I can choose how to respond." Replace "they made me angry" with "I notice anger arise." These shifts reinforce agency. Over time, the nervous system learns that triggers no longer control outcomes. Their intensity diminishes. The response becomes calmer by default. Rewriting responses also builds self-trust. Each time you respond with intention instead of impulse, confidence increases. You begin to trust that you can handle discomfort without losing composure. That trust compounds. Situations that once felt overwhelming become manageable. People notice the change. They sense that you are not easily provoked. Provocation loses its power when it no longer produces predictable reactions. This is how control becomes stable. You stop fighting triggers and start outgrowing them. You no longer react because you have trained yourself to respond. And in that shift, power stops being situational and becomes permanent.
Chapter 6. Why Chaos Exposes Weak Minds. Chaos does not create weakness, it reveals it. When structures fall apart, timelines shift, and certainty disappears, the mind is exposed. Some people tighten, they panic, rush, and grasp for control through force or speed. Others remain steady. They slow down, reassess, and adapt. The difference is not intelligence or experience, it is internal stability. Weak minds depend on predictability to feel safe. They need clear rules, fixed outcomes, and immediate reassurance. When chaos disrupts those conditions, their sense of control collapses.
Anxiety rises because the mind has not been trained to tolerate uncertainty. It interprets unpredictability as danger. This triggers urgency. Urgency demands action. Action taken from urgency is rarely strategic. It is reactive. People make decisions just to feel relief. They cling to familiar solutions, even when those solutions no longer fit the situation. They overcommit. They micromanage. They lash out or shut down. None of these behaviors restore control. They only create more instability. Chaos also exposes how much identity is tied to outcomes. When things go wrong, people who define themselves by success, approval, or certainty feel personally threatened. A setback becomes a statement about their worth. That emotional fusion clouds judgment. Instead of asking what needs to be done, the mind asks, how do I protect myself? Strategy disappears. Ego takes over. Weak minds also struggle because they confuse control with certainty. They believe being in control means knowing exactly what will happen. When that illusion breaks, they feel powerless. In reality, control has never been about certainty. It has always been about adaptability. The inability to accept not knowing is what makes chaos unbearable. Strong minds understand that uncertainty is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. They do not waste energy resisting it, they work within it. Another reason chaos exposes weakness is lack of internal anchoring. When external structures disappear, people look for something to hold on to. If they have not built inner stability, there is nothing there. Their mood, confidence, and behavior swing with events. One setback shakes them. One obstacle derails them. Chaos amplifies this volatility. Weakness becomes visible because there is no internal center holding everything together. This is why calm under pressure is rare. It requires training. It requires learning to stay present without needing immediate resolution. It requires the ability to sit with uncertainty without collapsing into reaction. Chaos does not reward force. It rewards composure. Those who remain grounded when everything shifts gain an immediate advantage. While others are scrambling, they are orienting. While others are reacting, they are positioning. Chaos exposes weak minds, but it elevates disciplined ones.
Becoming unshakable is not about eliminating fear or stress. It is about building an internal structure that holds steady even when pressure rises. Pressure is inevitable. What matters is whether your mind collapses inward or stabilizes outward when it arrives. Unshakable people are not immune to chaos. They are anchored within it. That anchoring begins with acceptance. The moment you stop demanding that situations feel comfortable or predictable, resistance dissolves. Resistance drains energy. Acceptance preserves it. This does not mean approval. It means recognizing reality without fighting it emotionally. When you accept what is happening, the mind stops arguing with the moment and starts working with it. This shift alone restores a significant amount of control. Another pillar of unshakable stability is internal grounding. When pressure hits, attention often shoots into the future. What if this fails? What if this gets worse? What if I lose something? These projections amplify fear. Grounding pulls attention back to what is actually happening now, the body breathing, the feet on the floor, the immediate next step. This keeps the nervous system regulated and the mind clear. Unshakable people train themselves to stay here, not because the future does not matter, but because panic about it is useless. They handle what is in front of them first. This preserves momentum. Unshakable stability also comes from trusting process over outcome. People who rely on outcomes for emotional security collapse when outcomes are threatened. People who trust their ability to adapt remain composed. They know they can adjust, recover, and redirect if needed. That trust is built through experience and reflection. Each time you navigate difficulty without losing control, you reinforce the belief that you can handle pressure. Confidence becomes earned, not imagined.
Another critical element is emotional containment. This does not mean suppression. It means allowing emotion to exist without letting it spill into behavior. You feel the stress, but you do not broadcast it. You feel the fear, but you do not let it dictate your decisions. This containment protects your position and your credibility. Others sense that you are steady even when conditions are unstable. That steadiness becomes influence. Finally, unshakable people simplify under pressure. They narrow focus to what matters most. They strip away non-essential concerns. They prioritize clarity over complexity. This prevents overwhelm and preserves energy. Pressure often scatters attention. Discipline gathers it. Becoming unshakable is not a single decision. It is a practice. Each moment of restraint, each pause instead of panic, each clear choice under stress compounds. Over time, pressure stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a signal to slow down, focus, and lead yourself first. When you can do that, no situation has the power to knock you off center.
Chapter 7. Why Rushing Destroys Leverage. Rushing feels productive, but it is one of the most common ways people give away power. When you rush, you signal urgency. Urgency signals need, and need collapses leverage. Most rushed decisions are not made because action is required, but because discomfort demands relief. Silence feels awkward. Uncertainty feels threatening. Waiting feels like losing. So people move quickly to escape the feeling instead of improving the position. This is how leverage disappears. Leverage depends on optionality. The more options you have, the more power you hold. Rushing eliminates options. It locks you into paths before information is complete and before dynamics have fully revealed themselves. When you move too fast, you commit before understanding the terrain. You accept terms you could have improved. You reveal intent before it benefits you. You solve problems that did not need immediate solving. Speed creates the illusion of control while quietly eroding it. Rushing also distorts judgment. When the mind is hurried, it prioritizes speed over accuracy. Nuance disappears. Risks are minimized or ignored. Long-term consequences are sacrificed for short-term certainty. This is especially dangerous in emotionally charged situations. A rushed response to criticism escalates conflict. A rushed agreement in negotiation weakens position. A rushed decision in uncertainty often creates more chaos than it resolves. People who rush believe they are being decisive. In reality, they are being reactive. Another hidden cost of rushing is that it teaches others how to treat you. When you respond immediately, people learn that you are accessible, interruptible, and pressure-sensitive. They expect instant answers. They push timelines. They apply urgency to move you. Over time, this conditions a dynamic where others set the pace and you follow. Control quietly shifts away from you. Strategic thinkers understand that time is not neutral. Time is leverage. The person who can wait without anxiety holds power over the person who cannot. Waiting allows information to surface. It allows emotions to settle. It allows priorities to clarify. Many situations resolve themselves if not forced prematurely. Others reveal their true nature when pressure is removed. Rushing robs you of that insight. This does not mean inaction. It means intentional timing. It means resisting the impulse to act simply because action feels comforting. Control is not proven by speed. It is proven by precision. When you slow down while others rush, you gain perspective. When you choose timing instead of urgency, you regain leverage. The ability to wait calmly is not weakness. It is one of the clearest signs of power.
Time is not just something that passes. It is something that can be used. Most people experience time as pressure. Deadlines loom, responses feel urgent, decisions feel overdue. This creates a constant sense of being chased. Strategic control begins when you stop treating time as an enemy and start treating it as an ally. The person who understands time understands leverage. When you do not rush, you gain access to information that others miss. People reveal more when they are not being hurried. Motives surface, conditions change, emotions cool. What felt urgent yesterday often looks different tomorrow. By allowing time to do part of the work, you reduce the need for force. This is why patience multiplies power. Waiting is not passive when it is intentional, it is active positioning. Using time strategically also means choosing when not to engage. Not every message needs an immediate response. Not every problem needs instant resolution. When you delay thoughtfully, you communicate that you are not governed by external pressure. This shifts dynamics. Others adjust their pace to yours. They become more careful with their words. They reconsider demands. Time creates gravity. The one who controls the tempo controls the interaction. Time also sharpens decision quality. Distance reduces emotional distortion. What feels overwhelming in the heat of the moment often becomes manageable with space. When you step back, you can see trade-offs more clearly. You can evaluate consequences without emotional fog. This leads to cleaner choices. Choices made with clarity tend to age well. Choices made in haste often require repair. Another powerful use of time is letting situations reveal themselves. Many people rush to defined outcomes before reality has finished unfolding. They label situations too early. They commit to interpretations that later prove inaccurate. Strategic thinkers allow ambiguity to exist long enough for truth to emerge. They do not need to be first to decide. They need to be right. Using time as a tool also requires internal discipline. Waiting triggers discomfort. The urge to act is often the urge to escape uncertainty. When you can tolerate that uncertainty without moving impulsively, you gain emotional control. Each time you wait calmly, you train your nervous system to trust stillness. Over time, waiting stops feeling like risk and starts feeling like strength. This is how time becomes strategic. You stop racing the moment and start shaping it. You act when leverage is highest, not when anxiety is loudest. In doing so, you turn patience into presence and presence into power.
Chapter 8. Emotional control shapes how others treat you. People respond less to what you say and more to how you carry yourself emotionally. Emotional control is not invisible. It is communicated constantly through tone, pace, posture, and restraint. When you remain composed, others instinctively adjust their behavior. When you lose composure, they sense opportunity, instability, or weakness. This is not about dominance, it is about psychological signaling. Humans are highly sensitive to emotional cues. We read calm as confidence and volatility as vulnerability. When someone reacts emotionally, they reveal that the situation has power over them. That revelation shifts the balance. Others may push harder, speak more forcefully, or test boundaries because they sense movement. Control attracts respect because it signals self-trust. A person who does not rush to defend or explain communicates that they are secure in their position. This security creates gravity. Conversations slow down, interruptions decrease, demands soften. Emotional control changes the frame of interaction. Instead of being pulled into someone else's emotional state, you become the reference point. Others orient around your steadiness. This is especially evident in conflict. When one person escalates and the other remains calm, the calm person gains authority without saying a word. Escalation exposes emotional dependence. Calm exposes independence. Independence is power. Emotional control also prevents others from projecting onto you. When you are reactive, people fill in gaps with assumptions. They interpret your tone as weakness or hostility. When you are composed, interpretation narrows. There is less material for others to manipulate or misread. This clarity protects your position. It also reduces unnecessary conflict. Many power struggles exist only because emotions are exchanged and amplified. Remove the emotional fuel and the struggle collapses. Another effect of emotional control is consistency. People trust those who are predictable in their composure. Not predictable in outcome, but predictable in response. They know you will not explode, collapse, or panic. This reliability makes others more careful. They choose words more deliberately. They prepare better. They respect boundaries without them needing to be enforced loudly. Emotional control also strengthens influence over time. You become the person others look to when things are tense. Your calm becomes stabilizing. That role naturally carries authority. You are not trying to control others, you are controlling yourself, and that self-control quietly shapes the environment. How others treat you is largely a reflection of what you tolerate and what you project. When you project composure, you set a higher standard for interaction. People rise to it or reveal themselves. Both outcomes serve your control.
True influence does not rely on pressure, volume, or authority. It comes from presence. When you lead without force, you are not pushing others to comply. You are creating a psychological environment where compliance feels natural. This begins with emotional containment. People feel safer and more open around someone who is not reactive. That safety lowers defenses. Lowered defenses increase receptivity. This is how influence moves quietly and effectively. Composed individuals do not need to assert control because their behavior already signals it. They listen fully without rushing to respond. They speak clearly without over-explaining. They maintain steady eye contact and measured tone. These signals communicate confidence without aggression. Others instinctively mirror this energy. Conversations become more thoughtful. Decisions become more deliberate. Leadership emerges without being announced. Leading without force also means allowing others to reveal themselves. When you do not rush to correct, dominate, or persuade, people fill the space with their intentions. They talk more. They justify more. They show priorities. This information is leverage. Force shuts this process down. Presence keeps it open. Many people try to control outcomes by tightening their grip. Strategic leaders do the opposite. They loosen control over the interaction while maintaining control over themselves. This paradox creates influence. Others feel respected rather than constrained. Respect builds cooperation. Cooperation sustains power longer than coercion ever could. Another aspect of leading without force is emotional neutrality. Neutrality does not mean lack of opinion. It means not broadcasting internal reactions. When people cannot read your emotional investment, they cannot easily manipulate or pressure you. They must engage with substance instead of emotion. This raises the level of interaction. Decisions shift from emotional contests to practical alignment. That shift favors the composed. Leading without force also requires comfort with silence and delay. You do not need to fill gaps or rush closure. Allowing conversations to breathe signals confidence in your position. Others sense that you are not chasing agreement. This often makes them more willing to meet you halfway. Over time, this style of leadership builds trust. People know you will not overreact, exploit, or abandon composure when challenged. That trust becomes authority. Authority earned through consistency lasts. Authority demanded through force erodes. When you lead without force, you become a stabilizing presence. Others feel it immediately. They may not be able to articulate why, but they respond differently. They listen more carefully. They speak more honestly. They take you seriously. This is the quiet power of control. Not imposed, not announced, simply embodied.
Chapter 9. How Ego Hijacks Decision-Making. Ego is one of the most subtle enemies of control because it disguises itself as confidence, self-respect, or strength. In reality, ego is the need to protect an image. That need quietly interferes with judgment. When ego is active, decisions are no longer made based on what is effective. They are made based on what preserves identity. The question shifts from what is the smartest move to what makes me look right, strong, or superior. This shift is small but costly. Ego reacts quickly because it perceives threats everywhere. A challenge feels like disrespect. Feedback feels like attack. Disagreement feels like loss. Once ego is engaged, emotional energy floods the system. The body tightens, the mind narrows, options disappear. Control slips because the goal is no longer strategy, it is self-defense.
This is why ego-driven decisions often escalate situations instead of resolving them. They prioritize winning the moment over protecting position. Ego also resists pause. Pausing feels like weakness to the ego because it creates space where doubt might enter. So ego rushes, it speaks quickly, it commits early, it doubles down instead of reassessing. This is how people talk themselves into bad deals, unnecessary conflicts, and irreversible mistakes. They would rather be consistent with their identity than correct in reality. Ego also distorts perception by filtering information selectively. Evidence that supports the self-image is accepted. Evidence that challenges it is dismissed or attacked. This creates a closed loop. The person feels justified, even as outcomes worsen. From the inside, ego feels like certainty. From the outside, it looks like rigidity. Control cannot exist in rigidity. Control requires flexibility. Another way ego hijacks decision-making is through comparison. When decisions are driven by how you stack up against others, clarity disappears. You rush to keep up. You overextend to prove worth. You take risks not because they align with your goals, but because you fear being seen as less. Comparison pulls attention outward. Control requires attention inward. Ego thrives on external validation. The need to be seen, respected, or admired hands power to other people's reactions. When approval becomes fuel, composure becomes fragile. The strongest people are not those who defend their ego most aggressively. They are those who no longer need to. They can admit uncertainty. They can revise decisions. They can stay silent when provoked. This is not weakness. It is freedom. Ego hijacks decision-making by making everything personal. Control returns when you make it strategic again.
Control is often misunderstood as the ability to dominate circumstances or people. In reality, the highest form of control is self-mastery. When you master yourself, situations lose their ability to provoke, rush, or destabilize you. Ego wants to control the outside world because it feels safer than confronting the inner world. But trying to control situations is exhausting and unreliable. Mastering yourself is sustainable. It is the shift from forcing outcomes to governing responses. When ego loosens its grip, decision-making becomes cleaner. You stop reacting to perceived threats and start responding to actual conditions. You are no longer trying to prove anything. That alone removes a tremendous amount of pressure from your choices. Self-mastery begins with restraint, not reacting immediately, not defending automatically, not escalating emotionally. Restraint creates space. Space allows perspective. Perspective restores control. This is why calm people often appear powerful, even when they say very little. They are not consumed by the need to win every interaction. They are focused on long-term positioning. Mastering yourself also means letting go of the need to be right. Being right feels satisfying in the moment, but it often costs leverage. Strategic control prioritizes effectiveness over validation. Sometimes the smartest move is silence. Sometimes it is disengagement. Sometimes it is allowing others to believe they are winning while you preserve your position. Ego resists this because it equates concession with weakness. In truth, selective disengagement is strength. It keeps you from wasting energy on battles that do not matter. Another aspect of self-mastery is emotional ownership. When you stop blaming others for how you feel, you regain agency. You recognize that anger, frustration, and insecurity are internal signals, not external commands. This realization is empowering. It means no one can make you lose control unless you hand it over. Over time, this builds unshakable confidence. You trust yourself to handle discomfort without reacting destructively. That trust replaces the need for ego defense. Mastering yourself also sharpens discipline. You choose actions based on values and long-term goals rather than impulse. You become consistent. Consistency builds credibility. Credibility builds influence. Influence sustains control. Situations change, people change, outcomes fluctuate, but self-mastery remains stable. When you master yourself, you stop fighting the world. You stop needing to dominate situations to feel secure. Control becomes internal, portable,
and reliable. You are no longer dependent on circumstances being favorable. You remain composed regardless. That is real power.
Chapter 10. Why Emotional People Escalate Situations. Conflict rarely escalates because the issue is complex. It escalates because emotions are unmanaged. When people feel threatened, misunderstood, or disrespected, the nervous system shifts into defense. In that state, the goal is no longer resolution, it is protection. Words become sharper, tone hardens, listening collapses. Each side reacts not to what is being said, but to what it represents emotionally. This is how small disagreements turn into power struggles. Emotional escalation follows a predictable pattern. One person feels tension and responds with intensity. The other mirrors it or counters it. The exchange becomes about dominance rather than understanding. Once that happens, control is lost on both sides. Logic has no influence when identity feels at stake. Emotional people escalate because they confuse intensity with strength. They believe raising their voice, asserting their position, or forcing clarity will restore control. In reality, it does the opposite. It narrows options and locks everyone into defensive positions. Escalation also feels justified from the inside. When emotions are high, the mind constructs a narrative that supports reaction. It labels the other person as unreasonable, disrespectful, or hostile. This story fuels further escalation. Each reaction reinforces the belief that escalation is necessary. From the outside, it looks chaotic. From the inside, it feels righteous. Another reason emotional people escalate is fear of losing ground. Silence feels like surrender. Pause feels like weakness. So they fill space aggressively to avoid feeling vulnerable. This urgency signals insecurity. Others sense it immediately and respond with resistance or counterpressure. The cycle continues. Emotional escalation is also contagious. Humans mirror emotional energy instinctively. When one person loses control, others feel pulled into the same state. The interaction becomes reactive rather than intentional. Control disappears because no one is regulating the emotional field. Everyone is contributing to it. This is why emotional people often feel exhausted after conflict. They have burned energy without gaining leverage. Escalation creates noise, not solutions. Strategic control requires the opposite response. It requires slowing the interaction instead of intensifying it. It requires refusing to mirror emotional energy. It requires the ability to stay composed when provoked. Emotional people escalate because they are trying to regain control externally instead of internally. They mistake expression for power. In reality, power in conflict comes from regulation. The person who stays calm controls the tempo. The person who controls the tempo controls the outcome.
De-escalation is often mistaken for submission. In reality, it is one of the strongest expressions of control. When you de-escalate, you are not backing down. You are refusing to be pulled into a losing frame. Emotional escalation thrives on reaction. It needs energy, resistance, and engagement to survive. When you remove those elements, the dynamic collapses. This is strategic dominance. You are choosing the terms of the interaction instead of accepting the ones imposed on you. De-escalation begins with regulation. Before addressing the other person, you stabilize yourself. You slow your breathing. You soften your posture. You lower your voice. These signals communicate safety and authority simultaneously. They interrupt the emotional momentum. People often calm down not because they are persuaded, but because the emotional environment changes. Your composure resets the tone. This gives you control without confrontation. Another key element of de-escalation is neutrality. You do not mirror emotion. You do not argue feelings. You acknowledge without agreeing. Statements like, "I hear what you are saying," or "let's slow this down," are not concessions. They are anchors. They pull the conversation out of reaction and back into clarity. Neutral language prevents identity clashes. It keeps the issue separate from the person. That separation is crucial. Once identity is protected, cooperation becomes possible. De-escalation also involves pacing.
You do not rush to resolve everything at once. You focus on the next manageable step. Slowing the timeline reduces pressure. Pressure fuels escalation. Removing pressure restores thinking. When people realize they are not being forced or cornered, defensiveness drops. Leverage returns to the one who can wait calmly. Strategic de-escalation also includes knowing when to disengage. Not every conflict needs resolution in the moment. Sometimes the most powerful move is to pause the interaction entirely. Stepping away preserves control and prevents damage. It signals self-respect and boundaries. This often shifts dynamics more effectively than continuing to argue. De-escalation is dominance because it preserves your position. You do not lose composure. You do not reveal insecurity. You do not create statements you later need to defend. Instead, you maintain clarity while others burn energy. Over time, people learn that escalation does not move you. They approach you differently. They adjust their behavior. This is not manipulation, it is consequence. When you refuse to participate in chaos, chaos loses influence. Control in conflict does not come from overpowering others. It comes from staying grounded when others cannot. That steadiness shapes outcomes more reliably than force ever will.
Chapter 11. Why Stress Destroys Judgment. Stress narrows the mind. When pressure rises, the brain shifts into survival mode. Its priority becomes speed and safety, not accuracy or strategy. This response evolved to handle immediate physical threats, not complex decisions. Yet most people allow stress to drive their thinking in situations that require clarity, patience, and perspective. This mismatch is why stress quietly destroys judgment. Under stress, attention collapses. The mind fixates on the most immediate problem and ignores everything else. Long-term consequences fade. Secondary effects are overlooked. Options disappear. Decisions become binary. Fight or flee. Act now or lose. This tunnel vision feels decisive, but it is not intelligent. It sacrifices depth for speed. In doing so, it trades control for relief. Stress also amplifies emotional bias. Fear exaggerates risk. Urgency magnifies importance. Small issues feel catastrophic. Neutral information is interpreted as negative. This distortion convinces people they are thinking clearly when they are not. From the inside, stress feels like focus. From the outside, it looks like overreaction. This is why people often regret decisions made under pressure. They acted on a distorted picture of reality. Another way stress destroys judgment is by hijacking memory and reasoning. When the nervous system is activated, access to higher-level thinking is reduced. The brain pulls from familiar patterns instead of creative solutions. It defaults to habit. This is why people repeat mistakes under stress. They are not choosing freely. They are replaying old responses. Control disappears because choice disappears. Stress also creates false urgency. It convinces you that delay equals danger. This pushes people to commit prematurely. They agree to terms without leverage. They respond emotionally to provocation. They make irreversible moves to escape discomfort. Once the stress subsides, clarity returns, but the decision remains. This is how stress locks in poor outcomes. Another hidden effect of stress is erosion of self-trust. When decisions made under pressure lead to negative results, confidence weakens. People begin to doubt their judgment. This doubt increases future stress, creating a loop. Each pressured decision becomes harder than the last. Control erodes gradually. Strategic thinkers recognize this pattern and interrupt it early. They do not treat stress as a signal to act. They treat it as a signal to slow down. Stress indicates that perception is compromised. It is a warning, not a command. Until the nervous system settles, judgment cannot be trusted. Control in decision-making begins with regulation. Without it, even intelligent minds produce weak outcomes. Understanding how stress destroys judgment is the first step toward protecting your power when it matters most.
Clean decisions are not made in the absence of pressure. They are made in the presence of pressure without surrendering to it. The difference lies in process. When pressure is high, most people try to think faster. Strategic thinkers do the opposite. They slow the internal process, even if the external situation remains demanding. This protects judgment. The first rule of clean decision-making under pressure is regulation before evaluation. If the body is tense and the mind is racing, analysis will be distorted. You cannot think your way out of a dysregulated state. You must settle it first. Slower breathing, grounded posture, and deliberate pacing signal safety to the nervous system. As the body stabilizes, cognitive clarity returns. This creates the foundation for sound judgment. The second rule is reducing complexity. Pressure creates the illusion that everything matters equally. It does not. Clean decisions come from identifying the few variables that actually influence the outcome. Strip away noise, ignore secondary opinions, focus on what is controllable and what aligns with long-term priorities. This prevents overwhelm and preserves energy. Simplicity is not oversimplification, it is precision. Another critical element is decision filtering. Strategic thinkers use internal filters to guide choices when time is limited. Does this decision align with my values? Does it protect my long-term position? Is this reversible or irreversible? These filters cut through emotional bias and narrow options quickly without panic. They replace impulse with structure. Structure restores control. Clean decisions also require tolerance for imperfection. Under pressure, there is rarely a perfect option. Waiting for certainty often creates worse outcomes than choosing the best available path. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means accepting that clarity is sometimes partial. Strategic control is not about eliminating risk. It is about managing it intelligently. Another discipline is separating urgency from importance. Pressure often disguises urgency as importance. Ask whether this truly requires immediate action or whether delay improves the decision. Many high-pressure situations benefit from a pause. Even a short one can change perspective dramatically. Finally, clean decision-making under pressure depends on self-trust. You must trust your ability to adapt if new information emerges. This reduces fear of making the wrong choice. When you know you can adjust, you are less likely to freeze or rush. Confidence becomes grounded rather than emotional. Over time, practicing clean decisions builds resilience. Pressure stops feeling threatening because you trust your process. You know how to slow down, simplify, filter, and choose. That trust is what allows you to remain powerful when others lose clarity. Decisions made this way compound positively. They protect your position and reinforce control.
Chapter 12. Why control must become who you are. Control cannot remain a technique you reach for only when things go wrong. If it is situational, it will fail under real pressure. Lasting power comes when control becomes identity, when composure is not something you try to summon, but something you expect from yourself. Most people rely on willpower to stay calm. Willpower is fragile. It disappears when emotions spike or fatigue sets in. Identity does not. Identity shapes behavior automatically. When you see yourself as someone who remains centered, you do not debate whether to react. Reaction simply stops being an option. This is how control becomes reliable. Identity-based control is built through repetition. Each time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce a self-image. Each time you choose restraint over impulse, you confirm who you are. Over time, the nervous system adapts. Situations that once triggered urgency now register as manageable. Emotional spikes shorten. Recovery speeds up. Control becomes your baseline, not your exception. This shift also changes how you prepare for situations. You no longer hope to stay composed. You assume you will.
That assumption alters posture, tone, and pacing before anything even happens. Others sense this immediately. They interact with you differently because you are not broadcasting volatility or need. Presence becomes steady. This steadiness compounds socially and professionally. People trust those who are consistent under pressure. Trust creates influence. Influence sustains power. Making control part of identity also means redefining strength. Strength is no longer intensity or dominance. It is stability. It is the ability to hold your ground internally, regardless of external movement. This redefinition protects you from ego traps. You no longer need to prove control through force or reaction. You demonstrate it through restraint. Identity-based control also simplifies decision-making. When faced with tension, the question is no longer, "What should I do?" It becomes, "How would someone who is composed handle this?" The answer is often obvious. Pause, observe, choose deliberately. Control becomes automatic because it is aligned with who you believe you are. This alignment removes internal conflict. You are not fighting yourself to stay calm. Calm is the default. Becoming someone who is always powerful in any situation does not require perfection. It requires consistency. Control as identity is not about never feeling emotion. It is about never being ruled by it. When control becomes who you are, power stops being fragile. It becomes permanent.
When control becomes identity, life begins to feel different. Situations that once triggered urgency no longer dominate your attention. You still feel pressure, emotion, and uncertainty, but they no longer dictate your behavior. You move through challenges with a steady internal rhythm. This steadiness is not accidental. It is the result of repeated restraint, reflection, and alignment. Living as the one who is never rattled does not mean avoiding difficulty. It means meeting difficulty without surrendering composure. You do not rush to fix, explain, or defend. You allow moments to unfold. You listen more than you speak. You choose timing over impulse. This creates a quiet authority that others recognize immediately. People stop testing your boundaries because your presence communicates that reactions will not be extracted easily. One of the most noticeable shifts is how conflict changes around you. When you remain calm, escalation loses fuel. Others either de-escalate or reveal their instability. In both cases, you gain clarity. You are no longer pulled into emotional exchanges that drain energy. You conserve focus for what matters. This makes your actions more effective and your decisions cleaner. Living unshaken also changes your relationship with uncertainty. You no longer need immediate answers to feel safe. You trust your ability to adapt as information emerges. This trust reduces anxiety and increases patience. Patience sharpens perception. Perception improves timing. Timing multiplies power. Over time, this way of operating compounds. Your reputation becomes associated with steadiness. People seek your input when situations are tense. They value your judgment because it is not clouded by emotion. This influence is earned, not claimed. It grows because you are reliable under pressure. Living this way also protects your inner life. Emotional energy is no longer wasted on unnecessary reactions. You recover faster from stress. You sleep better. You think more clearly. Control becomes a source of peace rather than tension. This is the final shift. Control stops being about managing situations and becomes about managing yourself. You do not dominate the world. You navigate it. You are not untouched by chaos. You are unaffected by it. This is what it means to stay powerful in any situation, not because the world is calm, but because you are.
Conclusion: control as a way of living. Staying powerful in any situation is not about mastering techniques. It is about embodying a way of being. Throughout this book, one truth has remained constant. Control is internal before it is external. The moment you stop trying to dominate outcomes and start governing your responses, everything changes. Situations lose their ability to rush you. People lose their ability to provoke you. Uncertainty loses its grip on your mind.
You begin to move through life with quiet precision instead of reactive force. This does not make life easier, it makes you stronger. You no longer need ideal conditions to feel grounded. You no longer depend on approval, certainty, or immediate resolution to stay centered. You trust yourself to adapt, to pause, to choose deliberately. That trust is the foundation of real power. When control becomes a way of living, not a tactic, your presence alone shifts dynamics. Others feel it, they respond to it, they adjust around it. You do not need to announce strength or demand respect. It is communicated through composure, restraint, and clarity. This is the kind of power that does not fade under pressure. It grows. You will still face conflict. You will still experience stress. You will still feel emotion. But you will no longer be ruled by these forces. You will recognize them, regulate them, and respond from alignment instead of impulse. Each moment becomes an opportunity to reinforce who you are: calm, measured, unrattled. Control is not about suppressing yourself, it is about mastering yourself. And self-mastery is the one form of power no situation can take away. When you live this way, you stop reacting to life and start shaping it quietly, consistently, and on your own terms.